All right, everybody. I just got done checking out your discussion board posts for week 3 and week 4. So as we're heading into the writing projects, kind of want to get a sense of where you were. And so I just have a few things I want to talk about. I really miss that we can't have classroom conversations. I think the discussions I have in the classroom with students here help a lot with those connections. So many of you pointed out you enjoyed the fairy tales. Some of you liked the readings out of the Norton Reader. They were hit and miss, and that's fine. That's why I give you as many as I do, because I know you'll like some, you won't like others, you'll connect with some, you won't connect with others, you'll understand some, you won't understand others. That's okay. Not everything needs to be perfectly clear. That's why there's a number of selections. But I'll try to throw together some quick videos where I highlight just a few of the main points that we talk about in the class. I didn't want to give those to you before you did the reading because I didn't want to lead you in the readings. I didn't want to just tell you, hey, here's what you're supposed to see. I really don't have one particular thing or two particular things I want you to see. I want you to be able to look for and make those connections yourself so that you can come up with an interesting topic, something you want to research and write about, instead of just something that I suggest to you. So there's some good stuff going on, and I'll talk about those later. But really quickly, a few things about the fairy tales that I noticed. A lot of you mentioning the original version of the story. What is the original version of the story? There's a lot of confusion there. If you're interested in one of these fairy tales, you should check out the history. And Surlaloon is great. They give you those links right on the side. You can look at other versions of the story. You can look at the history of the story. They write you a short little essay explaining, hey, this story originated here and it moved to this other country at this point, and then it went here and there. And, it's important to understand that identifying an original story in the case of a fairy tale is almost impossible. Because they started as oral tradition, and then at some point they enter a literary tradition at different points in time. The general flow of a fairy tale in Europe would be sort of south to north. That's the flow of almost all artistic history, intellectual history in Europe is south to north. So just basically Italian versions of the fairy tale from around the 14th century, and then you get the French collections by Perrault, which were some of the ones that you read, 17th century. Then the Grimms are early 19th century in Germany. You have a similar movement going on in Iceland with Asbjornsen and Moe. They're putting together a sort of collection of Scandinavian fairy tales right around the same time. So that's the general flow. And then you have the English fairy tale collections at the end of the 19th century. So Disney, not the original, certainly. Although I think when a lot of you mention original, what you mean is the original to you, right? The original story that you had heard as a kid, and that might have been the Disney version. But we can be clear about that. Also, Grimm is not the original, right? They were very late in the game and made a lot of changes to these stories. So that's an interesting thing to think about, something you might want to research. Also important to note that these are not American fairy tales. None of these are American fairy tales. There are very few truly American fairy tales. America has a lot of folklore, not a lot of fairy tales. And the stories that you're reading are not American fairy tales. They're French, they're German, and if you start to look into older versions, maybe Italian. And of course, there are a lot of African and Russian and Asian fairy tale traditions that tie into these as well. And those are all things you might be interested in looking at for a paper topic. Okay, but they're not American. Also, many of you mentioning that these are more adult tales. That was not the intended audience. Whatever you're picking up on here in terms of the content, the darkness, the seriousness, the tone of the story, these were stories intended for children. Okay, and up until about the 1950s, this coincides with Disney, these were the stories that kids would have known. Okay, so that also might be an interesting topic to think about, to trace those darker themes, the more seriousness, serious tones of the stories, and what makes them seem dark, trace that over a period of time, over a number of cultures with a single story, and see how that develops. That might be something interesting as well. So that's just a few points to keep in mind. Like I said, I'll try to post quick little videos making some specific connections for you between a fairy tale and its Norton Reader essay that I assigned, so that you can see maybe what I was thinking about in terms of the connections. But don't be afraid of your own connections. And those of you who mentioned that you saw thematic connections, that's the kind of connection you should be finding. There's not really a connection in the way that the things are written because they're not the same kind of text. I mean, one is a fairy tale and one is an essay. So that's not what I meant. Thematic connections. Right. How does something discussed thematically in the essay help you understand something thematic about the story? So I'll try to make a few explicit points for you on each of those pairs to help you out. But I didn't want to give that to you in advance because I wanted you to have the chance to come at it unbiased and try to find your own connections. All right?